Okay, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Again, my name is Dr. Camila Rashad. You are tuned in to the Black Muslim COVID Coalition's third webinar, which is Wisdom of the Elders, Bearing Witness to Our Past, Present, and Uncertain Future. We are happy to have you here, glitches and all. The National Black Muslim COVID Coalition is an initiative that's launched in collaboration with Muslim Wellness Foundation and Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative to really begin to, as quickly as we can, strategize around how to effectively organize and plan and address the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in Black Muslim communities. This webinar, I am particularly just thrilled about because we have seen that the pandemic is affecting the Black community in ways that some of us sort of anticipated, right? But it is also impacting differently and uniquely on sort of particular aspects of our communities. And so today we wanted to focus on wisdom of the elders and really thinking about how we care for and include and honor the wisdom of our elders in the community, both understanding their risks and also understanding that they are going to be impacted in ways that we have to be prepared for. So we're going to go ahead and get started. If I can first stop my notifications. Let's see. Okay. Okay, and I will get you all back into the presentation. Okay. So again, if you're just joining in, this is Wisdom of the Elders, Bearing Witness to Our Past, Present, and Uncertain Future, a webinar that is sponsored and organized by the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition. And we are a coalition that has come together very quickly, alhamdulillah, in order to address the impact of the COVID pandemic on our Black Muslim communities. Okay, so the reason that we are focusing on our elders in particular today is, if you may recall, about a couple weeks ago, I know time is a little blurry that we're all trying to figure out. Yeah. And so we want to focus on our elders because this statement was made. And, before, I want to remember I'm a little distracted. So I'm reminding myself first, as well as those of you who are tuned in, to take a deep breath. And again, this is a reminder to myself first, to take a deep breath, to say a kind word to yourself. Perhaps that's, I'm doing the best I can today. It is, I am feeling very sad, or I'm feeling discouraged, but I'm still doing the best that I can in this moment with Allah's help. And with that, I want to begin by, of course, saying Bismillah, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, and His mercy is present in every single second of our lives, amidst tragedy, amidst joy. Allah's mercy and presence and comfort and love is with us. And so with that in mind, we want to talk about our elders and this statement, or sort of this insinuation that was made by the Texas Lieutenant Governor a couple weeks ago, that old people should volunteer to die to save the economy. I don't know which grandparents he's talking about willing to sacrifice themselves, but in our communities, in our Black Muslim communities specifically, our elders are a treasure that we will not give up, not this way. And with Allah's help, we will do everything in our power to preserve their life and their safety. Dr. Christina Harrington This particular quote stood out to me in her explanation of why, especially poor older Black Americans, are being impacted, and what it means for them to be seen in certain ways. And she says, they are more than sick cases and incidence numbers. Our elders hold the wisdom of having lived through several other global health pandemics, wars, the civil rights movement, and the Jim Crow era, as well as terrorism attacks such as 9/11. Many survived these while raising children and holding down backbreaking jobs. They've seen this country through a unique lens of being thought of as less than for their race and social class, and now because of their age. They display a strong sense of resilience that we could learn from during the pandemic. Instead of seeing them as a weak link in the economy, we need to advocate for marginalized groups who truly need to seek support from them, for our leadership. We need to look to our elders to learn how to pull resources and ways to lean into a stronger sense of community. Okay. So with that as sort of a backdrop, that there were calls for us to, in some way sacrifice, is like, what in the Hunger Games? We are not sacrificing our elders. They are treasures for us. And so we want to think about the ways in which we are told that our Black elders are disposable. And we know, in fact, that they are not. And so this is the agenda. This is what we're going to cover today, inshallah. We're going to share with you a bit about what is the Black Muslim COVID Coalition, why now, what is the impact of social distancing on older adults, talking about the power of storytelling, of story listening, and then thinking about what's at stake. And that is our cultural memory that our elders embody. And an overview of the Wisdom of the Elders Project, which is being launched by the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition, and then some reflections and stories from our elders. And once we have time for some questions and answers, hopefully, again, you all have registered and submitted some questions, and hopefully we will have answered some of those questions by the end of this presentation. Okay. So joining us on this webinar today is Zahir Ali, who is a senior fellow and oral historian for the Pillars Fund. And I want to tell a bit about the folks who are on this panel. Again, as reflective of our coalition, we have an interdisciplinary, intergenerational, multi-ethnic team of folks, however they identify themselves, as subject matter experts, as community members, as just a human being who is committed to ensuring that Black Muslim communities have their needs met and are safe during this global pandemic. So again, my name is Dr. Camila Rashad. I'm the founder and president of Muslim Wellness Foundation and founding co-director of the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition, along with Marguerite Hill of the Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative. Here is Zahir Ali, again, who's a senior fellow and historian for Pillars Fund. And as an oral historian, Zahir Ali believes that in order for us to be inspirational storytellers, we must first be engaged and active story listeners. For nearly 2 decades, he has worked as a listener, amplifier, and preserver of the stories of often marginalized voices. His oral history interviews has informed a Pulitzer Prize winning biography of Malcolm X, spawned a viral video on Muslim bakers, and inspired a critically acclaimed art installation. His current focus is on leveraging the power of American Muslim storytelling for social and cultural change as senior fellow of the Pillars Fund's Muslim Narrative Change cohort. Previously, as oral historian at the Brooklyn Historical Society, he directed several community-based initiatives that use the creative power of storytelling and story listening to recover and preserve histories, affirm and celebrate communities, and engage and encourage dialogue. Muslims in Brooklyn, my hometown, born and raised, I have to say that. The most recent initiative is a public history and arts project designed to amplify the stories of Brooklyn's Muslim communities and contextualize those stories in the broader histories of Brooklyn, New York City, and the United States. As a committed educator, he has taught for over a decade as an adjunct lecturer at New York University, including courses on United States history, Malcolm X, and Prince Rogers Nelson. Also joining us is Asha Noor, who is the coordinating director for the Communities United for Status and Protection. And she's a racial justice and human rights advocate. She is a peace building and conflict resolution specialist, trainer, and public speaker. She currently serves for this organization, which is a national collaborative of grassroots immigrant-led organizations. She's a trainer and longtime member of Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, and she holds a master's in conflict analysis and resolution from George Mason University School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution, and a bachelor's in political science from Michigan State University. Also joining us is Ustad Mahmoud Mohammed, who is also a 2018 Deeply Rooted Fellow. It's an initiative of the Muslim Wellness Foundation. And he currently serves as a chaplain for the Muslim Student Association of the University of Minnesota. He is a Minneapolis-born and raised Somali American. He's a graduate of Augsburg University with degrees in clinical psychology and history. Currently serving the Muslim community at the University of Minnesota, where he is pursuing a master's in heritage studies and public history. He is an avid reader, community organizer, and committed student of the Islamic sciences. He is passionate about community, collective critical literacy, and the power of tradition to create new positive social change. We have two elders who are legends in our community joining us via phone, inshallah, today. First, Sister Aisha Al-Adawiya. She's the community leader. I feel like I could go on and on about her bio, but she embodies a life grounded in a profound commitment to pursuing justice, social transformation, and deep, meaningful relationships. Born and raised in Alabama, Sister Aisha came to New York in the early 1960s, right after high school, to pursue a singing career. I bet you guys didn't know that. She was raised in the Black church and sang in her church choir. Describing herself in those years as a free spirit, she lived in Greenwich Village until moving to Harlem. Seeking a spiritual home, she said that Islam found me in 1972. She encountered Malcolm X and, quote, was blown away by him and began my education, as it were. Malcolm X continues to be my mentor. She has worked for more than 30 years at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem and is currently the administrator of its Scholars in Residence program. And she is also the founder of Women in Islam, Inc. in 1992 to bring the voices of Muslim women into critical community discussions that were local, domestic, and global in scope. Finally, our elder who will also be joining us via phone is Brother Lukman Abdul Haq or Kenny Gamble. He is known, again, little known facts. I mean, our elders are full of surprises. He's a singer, songwriter, and producer, born and raised in Philadelphia. He is, I guess, one part of the team known as Leon and Huff, Philadelphia Sound. He is also a philanthropist and a community organizer. I call him a legend. He, by the early 1990s, began to purchase homes in his neighborhood of South Philadelphia, over 100 abandoned homes, and began a process of community revitalization and founded the nonprofit Universal Companies to establish a workforce development center offering adult education and job training to all individuals. He has received numbers of different awards and honors for his work and dedication to the community. So I wanted to take a little time just so that you become familiar with the folks who are on this call, who are contributing to this conversation. And of course, if you have questions, inshallah, we'll be able to get to them. So I'm going to go quickly just providing a very brief background on the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition, again, an initiative launched by the Muslim Wellness Foundation and Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative on March 23rd. So sometimes it's helpful for me to even begin to date things because a day begins to feel like a week. And so when we think about the speed and the efficiency at which we were able to mobilize, across the country in order to pull us together to really brainstorm about how we were going to protect and serve each other, I am, humbled that this effort was able to come together so quickly. Our vision is that this is not just simply an organization or a network to address this pandemic, but into the future, thinking about liberation, healing justice, self-determination, all of those being linked, and drawing on the legacy of our ancestors and our elders and our roots in the Black freedom movements to strengthen leadership, support wellness, and to think about personal and social transformation. Our theory of change is that we are working as an interdisciplinary, intergenerational, multi-ethnic, faith and healing centered, trauma-informed, community-based organizing approach. And that sounds like a mouthful, but what we're saying is that this launching initiative requires the expertise, the contributions, the insights, and the perspectives of as many members of our communities as possible. And I am intentionally using the term Black Muslim communities because we speak different languages, we come from different regions and backgrounds, and we want to be conscious of centering that in our conversations. Our goals primarily at this phase is to disseminate accurate information, to make sure that given the history of healthy mistrust, of medical racism, of discrimination, which we are seeing in real time right now, that we have the best information possible to make the best decisions for ourselves and our families. So we'll be sharing best practices, supporting optimal health, and strengthening through all of these means Black Muslim leadership. So our 6 areas include health and wellness, spiritual well-being, education, advocacy and organizing, economic development, and arts and culture. So before we sort of delve into, in particular, how this is impacting our elders, what has become increasingly clear is that this is in some ways an epidemic within a pandemic, the way that it is impacting Black Americans and the response of those who perhaps before this time were either willfully ignorant or ignoring all of the challenges that Black Americans face. So these are just a few of the most recent headlines in the last 2 to 3 days, which give us sort of a sense of what we have known, right? Many Black Muslim communities, Black communities broadly, have known to be true about the disparities and the inequalities that we face when it comes to health, healthcare, and the services that are provided. So America set up Black communities to be harder hit, is one headline. It's a racial justice issue, so Black Americans are dying in greater numbers from COVID-19. That there's an outcry over racial data as the virus slams Black Americans. Again, once these become sort of national headlines, for many of us, it is far too late. And it is knowledge that we knew prior to this becoming sort of at the top of the radar of the American public. Another city, and many of the cities in which we're seeing a huge alarming numbers of Black and African Americans impacted are also cities that have large Black Muslim communities. So Chicago is one of them, that the disparity is such that Black Chicagoans are dying at nearly 6 times the rate of white residents. And from what I understand, Black residents of Chicago only make up about 30 to 35% of that city. So this is serious. The coronavirus from the BBC News is wreaking havoc in African American neighborhoods. And then finally, from the New York Times, Black Americans face alarming rates of coronavirus infection in some states. And from the Washington Post, just yesterday or a day or 2 ago, the coronavirus is infecting and killing Black Americans at an alarmingly high rate. So this rate of infection, of fatalities is extremely high. However, after sort of going through those headlines, I know that I feel within me a sense of heaviness. And while we are aware of the reality, we also want to be as plugged in to our strengths and our resources and our resilience as possible. And our Black elders provide an anchor from which we can do that. So there are challenges, physically being at a higher risk because of age, emotionally, the social distancing, being asked to separate physically separate from loved ones. Many of our elders rely on that connection to stay, stave off of a feeling of despair, of loneliness. And when that is disrupted, and the technological challenges then present itself, many are finding that quickly moving to everything being online or virtual is not the same, right? It's difficult for even those who sort of were raised in sort of this digital landscape. It's quite a challenge. And so for our elders, it may pose unique difficulties. There are financial and emotional challenges as well. But we want to talk about the strength of our elders as well. And that is, having been through those experiences, what have they learned? What can they teach us? What can we learn together? And how do we really harness the power of their strength in order to help provide guidance and reassurance and comfort to us? So the quote that I referenced at the very beginning by Dr. Christina Harrington, looking at how poor older Black Americans are an afterthought in the COVID-19 crisis, these older Black Americans should not be. And as far as we're concerned as a coalition, and you as listeners who are tuned in, they are not an afterthought for us. They are integral to this community, and we want to ensure that that remains so. And so whatever we can do to preserve and protect and honor our elders is really a top priority. I want to talk a little bit about just the reality of social isolation and how that impacts older adults. And knowing that the social isolation is not simply someone is alone, but that it is bad for the mental health of older adults. And this 84-year-old woman was interviewed, and she said, "I would just love to put my arms around everybody." One of the So the challenges that I found is, even how often I may have taken for granted a hug from someone, goodbye hugs. Now we can't do that if we're practicing social distancing. And as human beings, we crave, just that connection, that affection, those displays of love. And so think about our elders who may have also lost many of their loved ones because of their advanced age, and now not being able to have those connections to those who are still present. So again, Harry Taylor, who's a researcher on older adults and social isolation, said that the mortality effect of social isolation is like smoking 15 cigarettes per day. So just think about that, that the impact it can have on your health physically also has mental health implications. And this subjective isolation is really referencing not feeling close to family or friends. And then there's an objective isolation, which is, living alone, not having the kind of mobility that would allow for more frequent contact. And then there's loneliness. Right? It's something that everyone at some point in their lives will inevitably experience, but this is the feeling of being alone or separated. And what we know to be true is that it's possible to feel lonely, even in a crowded room, right? But you can also be alone and not feel lonely. So we want to pay attention to subjective versus objective isolation, and also feelings of loneliness or distress. So this was taken from healthline.com, thinking about, 5 tips to help talk to your older parents about social distancing. At the beginning, perhaps, many may have experienced what may have felt like a role reversal, right? That your older parents were going out like, well, I'm going to the masjid. I don't know what's going on with this corona thing, but I'm gonna go pray. And you're like, no, I'm not letting you out the house. This is serious. And so we want to make sure that we're using the right tools to have these conversations, and that we're coming from a place of love and concern and not control, right? Because it doesn't matter how old you are still a fully autonomous adult. And so that conversation needs to happen with expressions of love and concern first. And then asking questions, right? Why is this so important to you? Help me understand, given the risk, why you are still wanting to go out and to be with others. Sharing information from trustworthy sources. Our loved ones may have experienced, the most horrific sort of events in American history, or abroad, if they weren't born and raised in the United States. So rightfully skeptical and, you know, unsure of if we can really truly trust what the government is sharing with the public. And then finally, accept that you can only control you. And I would add that, you know, Allah is in control of everything. So all of that, again, providing a backdrop to this project and sort of our concern and really wanting to lift up the wisdom of our elders to bear witness to the past, the present, and the uncertain future. I want to bring in now our oral historian, Zahir Ali, to share a little bit about the importance of this history and what it means for us today dealing with this crisis.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Camilla. I begin in the name of Allah, the Merciful. Assalamu alaikum to all of the panelists and attendees. I put this quote because I thought this is exactly how I feel often at this moment or when talking about oral history. And it's an African proverb that says, when an elder dies, it is as though an entire library has burned down. And this is certainly drawing on the tradition of the griot, the storytellers, the people who keep histories. And it's important for us not to reduce people to material objects, but oftentimes we're not able to appreciate the value until we have a material symbolic replica of it. And I think, imagine not just a book, but an entire library burning down and losing, every time we lose someone, we lose that library. Next slide. I'm sorry, yeah, okay, there we go. So, you know, this is something that I think that is, we should always be doing. Like, we certainly should not just be concerned about listening to our elders and creating spaces to facilitate their storytelling just when we're in a crisis mode. We happen to be in a crisis mode because the crisis mode really drives home the precarity and preciousness of the stories that they represent and the people that they are. But every one of us is a kind of a timeline, and no, you know, a line is not always the best way to represent our lives because people don't often live their lives in a linear fashion. But just kind of ride with me for a second. If there were kind of continuity that we have, each one of us represents a fiber to that rope that connects us to the past. And that past has been disrupted through forced migration, through genocide, through slavery, through Jim Crow, through anti-Black riots like Tulsa and Red Summer, and you know, through war, through struggle, through trauma, through the Great Migration, through immigration. Each of those represent a potential rupture with the past. They often require people to move either physically or psychically, and often in ways that require them to make decisions about what they leave behind. Both in terms of what they leave behind materially and physically, but also what they leave behind in terms of past memories, past identities, past sets of knowledge, just in order to move forward. But every time that happens, it disconnects us, it breaks us from the past. And anytime that we're faced with a potential rupture, such as the one that we're facing now, we run the risk of being disconnected from our past. And, you know, I was trying to like fade out the people icon, but the shorter the timeline, the less present we are, right? Like, so this isn't just about, you know, recovering the past. This is very much about how we locate ourselves, who we are, our identity, which is rooted in this continuity, where we are, our sense of emotional and physical space is connected to this continuity. And when we are, where are we in our development as individuals and as communities is connected to where we are on this timeline. And each person represents the length of the line of their life, right? So someone who is 70 years represents 70 years of knowledge. right? And if we don't work to capture those 70 years, it's gone, right? If all we have left is what we know, you just represent your very short timeline in this long line here. You know, and I think about one of the kind of parallels people have been thinking about is the war on drugs and the HIV epidemic in the 1980s and 90s, which really produced a generational interruption, right? Like a whole generation was lost through through HIV and through the carceral state's actions with the war on drugs, right? So you had like this interruption of transmission of knowledge. And this generation was so critical because this was a generation that was a sort of like post-civil rights bridge that we didn't have that continuity. So this is why I think this is really important. It's not just important for this moment, but it's always been important. So I'm really glad that we're getting to focus on it. So if we can go to the next slide. Okay, here we go. So in this is the role of storytelling. And I always add story listening because storytelling is not a passive act. It shouldn't be a passive act. It is not you sitting down a microphone in front of someone and just letting them talk. Certainly that happens, but it is about actively creating the space that people feel comfortable sharing their stories. And I think, you know, as we go on, we'll talk about the challenges of intergenerational communication, you know, thinking about who's doing the recording or the collecting, who's doing the storytelling. Sometimes elders don't want to tell certain people in their family certain things, right? So we have to think about what is the best way to facilitate the story listening that people, of the stories that people tell. So I think of storytelling in terms of helping us with these three past, present, and future. One, it's a historical recovery. And I think Camila talked really well about, you know, the kinds of important resources that people bring from the past, people who have survived these disruptions, people who have survived the radical shifting of the way that we live, of the way that we work, and who have insight. They may not have had to change in the exact same technology, but they did have to experience change. I think about, you know, just looking at in the Nation of Islam, having talked to a lot of people, they had survival kits, right? Like they had survival kits that talked about how to preserve your food, how to do canning, how to cook prepare certain kind of foods that would last for a long period of time, how to purify water, things that like most of us don't know, right? Like, and so we can benefit from the history that people bring. And again, the more stories we record, the more we extend our own timeline. The second thing is what we're doing now, which is archival creation. We're creating a documentation of what we're all experiencing in this moment. Because when you have someone tell a story, they're both telling you what is, you know, they're recalling the past, but they're recalling the past in the context of the present. So their storytelling experience is very much a documentation of the past as well as it is the present. And why is this important? It's important because if we don't record our stories, what we'll be left with a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, are statistics.
Right.
X number of people were infected, X number of people died, X number of people had this. Our story is going to be those newspaper articles that Camila pulled up, right? That's going to be our story. And so we have the responsibility of documenting the experiences that people are having now. And keep in mind, these experiences, like March has been the longest year ever. So people, keep in mind, these experiences change day by day. If I had asked you to tell me your life story on January 1st, you would have had a certain perspective on your life. Now to tell your life story on April 10th or April 9th, it's a very different story, right? So keep in mind, the stories will change as the context changes, but that's part of creating an archive for now and for the future that adds texture, that adds qualitative nuance to the reductive ways that people look at data, and certainly to the blind spots that we see in the media's account of the experiences that people are having now. And then finally, storytelling and story listening are important for freedom dreams. They help give us a sense. History is not a ceiling. History is a foundation. History is what we stand on. And the stronger, the broader, the wider, the higher, the longer that history, the more we have potential to reach beyond it. So those are my 3 really quick points of why we need to engage in this kind of work. We need to do it to connect to our past. We need to do it to document our present. And we need to do it to imagine all of the possibilities of the future.
Alhamdulillah. I just felt, I was sitting here shaking my head like, yes, for all of those reasons. And, you know, and I'm hoping that, you know, for folks who might have just tuned in, you're listening to Zahir Ali, who is an oral historian and senior fellow at Pillars Fund, and has devoted many, many years of his life to sort of this, this practice of listening, of storytelling, of, you know, really curating the stories that need to be told and are often marginalized. And in this moment, I just want to lift up something that you said so eloquently, is that if we don't do this, right, we will be those statistics on the page, right? And I don't want those headlines to be the story of what happened to Black folks, right? That, you know, we can do the and, right? That it is a virus that is impacting us, that it is, you know, we feel like we were set up, and, right, we have, I believe, Allah has given us everything we need, right, to move forward. And we start by looking back, right? And by bringing everyone forward with us, and in particular, those who, you know, I just say that our elders and their knowledge is like the treasure, right? We are rich when it comes to that kind of treasure, and we need to preserve it at all costs. So thank you, alhamdulillah. I want to now bring forward Ustad Mahmoud Mohammed, who is the chaplain at the University of Minnesota, to talk about, you know, what our tradition says about honoring our elders, as this is a coalition that is steeped in, you know, and drawing from the legacy of our ancestors. Our faith tradition is healing centered and is focused on our liberation and well-being. And so we want to understand that spiritual and religious foundation. So Mahmoud, if you can just offer some words and reflections about why it's so important for us to honor our elders in this way.
Most definitely. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, I want to thank Muslim ARC, the Muslim Wellness Foundation, and the Black Muslim COVID Coalition for putting together really this wonderful program that brings together people engaged across the spectrum of services in our community, as historians, faith leaders, and those who are interested in really, promoting the public good. I think fundamentally Islam from its inception has been about preserving the honor of the human being, but particularly preserving the honor of those in our community who most deserve it. And something I loved about this hadith, and there's many variations of this narration, but this one I loved for a particular reason, is that even in its, hadith are made up of the chain of narration and the text. And this one I thought was particularly, prescient because the companion Amr ibn Shu'ayb narrated from his father, who in turn narrated from his own father, right? Which is itself an act of devotional piety, a living chain of narration. So the chain of narration of the hadith is just as important as the actual narration, the words of Prophet ﷺ, where he says, he's not one of us who does not have mercy upon our young, nor knows the honor of our elders. And so you see the Prophet ﷺ is setting a really wonderful precedent here, where the honor of our community is directly proportional to how much we honor our elders. And even to the point the Prophet ﷺ very rarely ever spoke in terms of othering, but here's a very clear example of othering, where the Prophet ﷺ says, if you don't fulfill this kind of behavior, or you don't fill this role, you're not one of us, right? And the Prophet ﷺ was one who was al-hashir, he brought people together. So the fact that he's taking a step to pull people out or push people out for their transgressions, it says a lot about the value and the honor of our elders. And also consequently, it says a lot about the mercy that we should have upon our young. And in a healthy community, we raise up our young to honor our elders. And that's what this is doing for us. So I think if you want to go to the next slide, Auntie. And so here I've just compiled a few more narrations to the same effect, right? To the same effect, right? Jibreel alayhi salam, who Islam was conveyed through, the Prophet ﷺ's conduit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet ﷺ's first teacher. We see in the hadith of Jibreel, where the Prophet ﷺ is learning from him, how much he honored Jibreel and how much he gave Jibreel the sharaf and the izzah he deserved. In the hadith it says, they sat leg to leg, right, knee to knee, thigh upon hand, looking him directly in the eye. And so you can see the Prophet ﷺ honors Jibreel as a teacher, but also Jibreel tells him, and Jibreel commands him, you must give priority to the elders, right? Priority in terms of care, in terms of kindness, in terms of allowing them to lead and to eat first and to sit first. And this is not because we view our elders as particularly vulnerable or fragile, but because this is what wisdom and time have given them as an honor, right? And so when the time for prayer is due, one of you should announce the adhan, and the oldest among you should lead the prayer, right? We're giving literally our living Islam, our faith, our salah. The moment we stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're putting that in the arms and the hands of those who have weathered really what is often a violent planet the longest, right? Brother Zahir talked about how our history has been disrupted. And as a historian, looking at all of the places that we come from and where we've been, we know that our history is disrupted often by acts of immense violence, right? From within our own communities and outside. And the world the Prophet ﷺ was born into was not unlike that, right? To see someone in their 50s or 60s, in the Prophet's time was, for a man to reach 40, they said he's reached old age, right? If you come from a place where tribal warfare is rampant, where disease and plague are commonplace, then getting to 40 years of age is a considerable achievement. And living to your 70s or your 80s is even seen as more so. Right? This is well before the advent of modern medicine. And so you can see in these particularly fragile societies where, access to water, right? Look at Islam, where Islam was born into, a desert environment. Who would drink first? Who would get first pickings of meat or rice? Who would have the plumpest dates? We see this in all the narrations of the hadith. That this was the honor that we showed to our elders.
And can I also add, Mahmoud, that even in today, right, 2020, United States of America, for a Black man to reach the age of 40, right, how much has changed?
Look at the parallels, right? And you can put this in a transnational context, a transregional context, for our men and for our women, Black people across the planet. You can look at the data that's been collected over the last 100, 120 years of life expectancies, even in the modern age, right? Modernity, I think, it does a great job at tricking us into assuming that this is the most enlightened or the most advanced we've ever been. And in fact, the opposite is actually sometimes quite true, right? We're not as healthy or as fit as we think we are. And so, time is precarious and no one is guaranteed any time. Prophet ﷺ was the best of mankind, died at what is a relatively tender age of 63, right? He had a full life ahead of him. And so this brings me to the next point, right? And the final hadith.
I am not sure if...
I know that the reality of the matter is that there's a lot of uncertainty about aging in across the planet, but particularly in America, right? The advent of and really the explosion of senior housing and senior care is something that's shaken a lot of Muslims to their foundation, right? How are we going to treat our elders? I was sitting in on a session a few weeks ago at our masjid where two older Somali men came and said, we're getting really, really nervous as we approach retirement. And, having worked in blue collar jobs for most of our lives in this country, we don't have much to our name. We don't have assets here or back home. And we fear that our children are going to put us in senior care housing. And there are, numerous anecdotes of elders being dropped off at some of these facilities without a care. And so part of it really, I think, there is a fear on the part of our elders that no one is going to look after them, right, as they age. And subhanAllah, I hope that we can, I know other communities have done really good jobs of putting together faith-based housing for their seniors, faith-based communities for their seniors, putting together these events that allow them to be in places and spaces where they feel like they're not alone, right? Loneliness is the great pandemic for people in this age group. So the question that I pose right now is, how do we prioritize our elders, and especially in this moment of crisis, as we transition into what seems to be a new normal. And that brings me really to the next point, actually, to really the transition. So as a historian, my area of focus is cultural memory, right? How do we remember the past, and how does the past inform our present, particularly among some of the things that I've listed here, right? And this is from Jan Assman, who's a scholar of religion and an anthropologist. Sites of cultural memory, they vary from culture to culture, right? And even as Muslims across our cultures, right? Even in our Black diaspora, and Auntie Camila Rashad likes to say that the Black Muslim mosaic, right? I'm a Somali American. We have Black Americans, African Americans, we have Eritrean, Sudanese Americans, Black Muslims in the UK, across the diaspora. As we shift from culture to culture, generally, I think our own sites of cultural memory can change and can shift. I know in my culture, a big part of it isn't textual traditions, right? It's oral traditions, the Somali culture, and Ash, I'm gonna talk about this later, of the gabe, the manso, devotional poetry, poetry to honor the elders. This is a huge part of our culture and tradition, right? But also the rites of passage, right? We talk about how does a person come into manhood or womanhood? How does a person come into being seen as a contributing member of a clan or a family unit? Monuments, right, and markers in our cultures. There's a tree, right, where 4 of my great grandfathers are buried in my ancestral home, right? That people pass by, and for those of us that are more folk religion oriented, they might go there and make dua consistently. And for those that are more, of a Salafi bent, they simply put their hand up when they walk by as a way to honor them. And each of these communities is honoring the dead in their own way, right? Celebrations, observances, Eid, right? Eid prayer, as our collective Muslim memory. Even though we're from different parts of the world and different parts of the Black mosaic, all of us have a certain understanding of what Eid is for us. That feeling of waking up on Eid morning is something a Muslim from any culture can really tap into and can talk about with the same language. And so these shift from culture to culture, but there's universality to them, right? There's a way that binds us all in that same fabric. And I think the challenge now is, as the fabric of our world is altered by this disease, and even perhaps irrevocably so moving forward, what sites of cultural memory are we going to honor, are we going to respect, and are we going to elevate? And I think Brother Zahir mentioned, right now we are creating cultural memory, right? We are producers and really the archivists of this memory. So who are we going to bring in? What perspectives will we honor? And really a question that we should ask is, who are we leaving out, right? Who's not at the table right now? Who's not being heard? And for whatever reason that is, Allah musta'an. So I think that's a good thing for all of us to consider as we have this convo today. And yeah, you can go to the next one. So I put together, and I'm a visual learner first and foremost. I put together 3 images that spoke to me particularly as I thought about how to honor our elders and what I see in each one. And then how that ties into the power of place, memory, and evocation, right? What that evokes in us. The first picture on the left, you guys can see that, right?
Yeah, I can see it.
That is a tree back home. The name is eluding me now, funnily enough. But it's a tree that we do a thing called hira around. Hira is the act of elders, particularly men, but also women sometimes, will gather around this tree for many different reasons. Sometimes to reconcile after infighting in a family or a clan, sometimes to make a declaration of war, right, in less enlightened times, sometimes to barter over, Allah musta'an, what is the next best place to move to in a particular family's roaming grounds. This is a tree where stories are told, where poetry is recited, where sometimes even there's poetic battles, right? People might have 2 poets of opposing clans will come together and they'll duke it out, kind of like a cipher, bar for bar, and people will cheer and they'll yell so as to big up their own guy, right, from their own family. But it's also where people come when a relative passes away and they want to pay their final respects before they're buried. And in fact, if a man is holy enough or a woman is holy enough, they might be buried under that tree for all of posterity to bear witness. And so for me, the first time I saw that tree, or my clan's tree, it was a moment that for me, even though I'd never been there, I'd never seen the red sand of my home, it put me right in that moment, in that place, and I felt the memory of my ancestors kind of course through me. I couldn't put a name to it, but it's an experience that really transcends, empiricity. We can't measure that, but I knew what I was experiencing, right? And so the next image is that tree actually is just kind of right down the thoroughfare into the first school that was built in my ancestral home, right? And you can see that in the middle picture. That's the very first school where all of our youth were educated. And now it's kind of decrepit and old, but the writing on the wall actually is an Arabic poem that, I think it was dated by someone in my family as being 400 years old, about the value of knowledge, right? And it says, and I can't see the text now, but it's a poem about how the intellect and knowledge are in quarrel, right? And the intellect thinks it's superior to, and knowledge here is sacred knowledge, right? Knowledge known through the Quran and the Sunnah. And the intellect is kind of the rational mind. And it has a particular traditionalist bent to it. But it was how my people were educated. Before you could enroll in the school, you have to memorize that poem. You have to understand the value and the power of traditional memory. And often who told it to you was the director of the school, was the oldest knowledgeable man in our community. And it's a direct link to that memory, right? It's a living testament to how we know things, right? Dr. Sylvia Tan-Malik was the one who introduced me to the idea, the framing of epistemology. How do you know what you know, right? How are you aware? How are you sure this is reality? How can you, what layers are you peeling back? What questions are you asking? And what perspectives are you not considering? Allah Musta'an. And that's my own. And the last one is the oldest mosque, I want to say, in Senegambia, in a city called Walili. It was built in one of the oldest traditional mosques, right, that maintains a structure. When I first saw it, I don't know what drew me to it, but this mosque is like burned in the back of my mind. But when I looked into the history of the mosque, this mosque is where, Allah Musta'an, if you have it, the elders were honored in terms of not only their role in religious leadership, but also anytime a meeting was called, this is where they would gather. And I was talking to one of my Gambian friends who told me these mosques are scattered throughout the countryside in Gambia and in Senegal. And they're kind of the majlis, the first and last defense against the erosion of culture. I just thought that was so powerful. So perhaps, and I'll close with this, a quote from perhaps one of my favorite authors, Chinua Achebe, who says, and he's talking here, and I'll finish with this. He's talking about a dialogue that he's having with a friend of his who is an East Indian, right? East Indian, who's working in East Africa when Achebe is active in that portion of the world. And he's the author of the book Things Fall Apart, a post-colonial theorist. He talks about the idea of home, right? And where we consider home and what is home and how does that idea loom large in our minds. And his colleague is telling him, we have to trample on the past, right? See the past first as a garden. You step on it and then you keep going. And the garden, it's not, all of us, I think, would be remiss to step on a rose today or to step through a bed of lilies or tulips. That would be a deeply vulgar thing because we want to preserve the beauty of that. But his friend is saying that's the past, right? You have to trample on it. And then over time, you don't see it as walking through a garden. You just see it as walking on any other road. But he says, we have to not see the past in that way. We have to see the past. And what he says word for word is, well, it is not true that my history is only in my heart, right? It is indeed there. But it is also in that dusty road in my town and in every villager living and dead who has ever walked on it. It is in my country too, and in my continent, and yes, in the world. That dusty little road is my link to all other destinations, right? And I think for those of us that are lost and whose history has been disrupted, who have been displaced and are looking for home, right? Home is also of the mind, right? Home is where we create value. And often, most importantly, with those who are the pallbearers, who are the gatekeepers of that memory. And that's our elders. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allows us to honor them. And really for us to think about that dusty road. Where is that dusty road in your hometown, right? Is it the barber shop in your neighborhood where your grandfather, your grandmother sits? Is it the porch of your house? Is it in the corner of the mihrab of the masjid where that uncle who doesn't say much but is there every morning is, right? Is it in your grandmother's short responses to what was it like growing up? Is it in our parents, sometimes long-winded 8-hour lectures about the past that we find hard to sit through, right? I think for all of us, it's perhaps and Achebe is another wonderful quote, each generation is particularly suited to answer the question of its own time. And I think the question of our time now is how do we find that dusty road, right? And who does it lead back to? Who's at the foot of that dusty road? And so if it's our elders, I ask that we honor them in the ways that we know how, inshallah ta'ala.
Wow, I feel like I'm learning so much and really honored to have, you know, each person's unique perspective and how we're pulling together sort of like this tapestry of knowledge from East Africa, from West Africa, from, you know, where we are presently. All of that remains. And so before we talk about the project of the Wisdom of the Elders project, I do want to bring in one of our elders, and I hope he's still on the line. And I will call him up. We're going to sort of bridge kind of the old school to the new school. So I'm going to put him on speakerphone, inshallah. This brother, Lukman Abdul Haq, he is, you know, as I said, a living legend and someone who is revered in our community. Assalamu alaikum.
Please leave your message.
Oh, well, he's not picking up, but we'll see if we can get him in before we conclude tonight. So I want to bring on Asha Noor, again, who's the coordinating director for Communities United for Status and Protection, who will be coordinating our project really to, again, weave together all of these elements to preserve the memory and the knowledge, the expertise, just the rich reflections of our elders currently, right, in this moment. As Zahir Ali mentioned, we are writing what is our present, right, with those who have experienced the past that may be very different, but also who can help us imagine a radically new future. So Asha Noor, I'm going to bring you forward so that you can offer our listeners a little bit more background on this project.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. I really want to begin by saying thank you to Muslim Anti-Racism Collaborative, as well as Muslim Wellness Foundation and the collective that we're working on, as well as my co-panelists. It's just been a short while, and I feel like I've learned so much from each and every one of you, mashallah. And also our elders, you know, without them and their guidance, we wouldn't be in this space to be able to share this knowledge and to really be able to enrich our own lived experience. So I'd like to definitely thank them in this moment. So a little bit about the project. So our vision is really to create this intergenerational space, and this webinar and a previous radio conversation that we had is really just starting to put that into practice. What we would like to see from this project, inshallah, is an ethnobiographical project that does sort of collapse time, space during this moment of social distancing. You know, social and physical distancing when it comes to our elders is not something that's new, unfortunately. We've heard a lot about this in our communities. As Brother Mahmoud said earlier, there is this legitimate fear that, you know, many elders in our communities, you know, feel that they'll be left behind or not really tended to or centered in their experiences. And so our mission, inshallah, is to be able to disrupt the narratives that view our elders as disposable, or that view them as burdens upon us, so on and so forth, and really to kind of look at them as what they are, which is carriers of our truth, carriers of our legacy, protectors of our legacy, because none of us would know who we are or begin to even know who we are without that transmission of knowledge. And so one of the goals of this collaborative interdisciplinary project, inshallah, is to be able to co-power intergenerationally. And we say co-power specifically because the concept of empowering implies that our elders are somehow disempowered and that somehow we are their saviors, when really that's not the truth. It is a matter of us collectively building that power and learning from one another, and being able to, inshallah, regain what's been lost, right? You know, both Zahir and Mahmoud and Camilla, you've spoken about sort of the historical disruptions that have happened because of mechanisms of conflict through time and space. And so what that has caused is sort of this fissure between generations. And so a really big piece of this project is to be able to heal that and to be able to flatten these oppressive narratives that really just don't allow us to see each other in our full humanity. So inshallah, that is sort of another core of what we'd like to see in this project.
Okay. I'm going to actually bring on, I have on the line, Brother Lukman Abdul Haq. Assalamu alaikum.
Hey, alaikum salam.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear you. So I have you on speaker so that they can hear you through Zoom. So we're just going to try to, meld these two platforms. And first, thank you so much for your time. And I've spoken to you, quite a few times over the last few days, and really, appreciate the wisdom that you offer. So first, I want to ask you, how are you feeling, right, in this moment that is so new and uncertain? How are you?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. I feel good, and of course, you got to be cautious in this world today. And so I'm just watching everything, as it unfolds right in front of our eyes.
Yeah,
it's like a new world is being that we're being exposed to.
Right. And for you, is there anything sort of in your lifetime that feels even remotely comparable to what's happening now?
Oh, no. Well, believe me, I have not seen anything like this. And I think that the first thing I notice about this is that it's affecting the whole world at the same time. And because I know that we live every day with these viruses and bacteria, and we're able to survive. Humanity has been able to survive these things that are in opposition to our existence, and so we've been here for quite some time. And but this one seems to be a little bit different. I was looking at. The name that they gave it was, it's called COVID-19, right?
Yeah, COVID-19, yes.
Right. So I'm saying to myself, I said, why would they give it 19? See, like, what was 18 and 17 and 16? Where did that number come from?
Well, from what I understand, that's from the year that they're sort of saying this is a new virus. So the coronavirus, the COVID disease, the D, sort of named in 2019. And so while there have been,
okay.
yes.
Right.
But you said this is something that you have never seen, and I wonder what aspects of what we're experiencing now feel like uncharted in your experience.
Well, I guess communications is better. Like when I was young, like measles and chicken pox, and everybody was pretty much we got vaccinated for a lot of that stuff when we were young. And so today I don't know what. I guess they're looking for something to vaccinate people, and it seems to be a lot of different opinions on vaccinations. And so it's a big learning experience that has to go down, especially for young people and for African Americans. It appears now that the African American community, just like it was with the AIDS virus, that it's you're talking about a group of people of our people. First of all, think that they can't get the virus, and just like it was with AIDS in the beginning. And I was just looking earlier tonight on TV. They were interviewing Magic Johnson, and it's been 30 years that he announced that he had the AIDS virus. And so since that time, I guess thousands and thousands of people have contracted that AIDS virus, and the same thing is going to be happening with this 19. How you pronounce it, Camilla?
COVID-19.
COVID. Okay.
COVID-19.
Yeah.
So, Brother Lukman, I have a two-part question for you. One thing I saw today on the news was that it looks like Philadelphia, where we are, is projected to be the next city where this is going to hit us pretty hard. So I wonder, what sort of, I want to say it this way. What frightens you the most about this new virus, something that you've never seen before in all of your 70 plus years? And what also brings you the most hope for our community? So first, what kind of frightens you, but then what brings you hope?
Well, I wouldn't say it frightens me because, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, that the human being has been able to withstand some unbelievable things, and I think that we have some brilliant people, scientists, and people that can help our community and humanity to survive. I believe that, and then I also think that we're seeing that now. Excuse me. We're seeing that now. People are coming from pretty much all over the world to New York. Yeah, and they're going to New York to work on trying to find a remedy or a cure for this virus. And I think it's always been like that, and it always will be. And what we have to do is to make sure that those among us who have the skills and have the capacity to be able to get them into schools, we have to start with education and not look at so much today, but look for tomorrow. Look at the past, what we've reacted to, number one, and how we reacted to it, and look at the future. How are we going to deal with this in the future? Because I mean, this too will pass, in my opinion, and I think that we have been given the foresight, as a part of Allah's creation. Everything that's here is made by. Everything is made by the Creator, Allah, the Creator, and so it has to be good. It's in some way, shape, or form, there is a lot of good that is coming out of this experience for humanity. So
that actually, I think that kind of leads to the second part of that question: is what is your hope for the future of our community as we wrestle with this thing?
Well, I think that the little baby that's being born, and the little kids that's 3 years, 4 years old, they have no idea what's going on right now. They're laughing, they're having fun, and whatever. It's for the aware people to unify. And I say this here, not just on this front, but this works for everything that we need. The unity of the human spirit is so important that we recognize and find a direction for ourselves that we might be able to give to our young people, so that from an economic standpoint, because a lot of this is economics also too, because the people who ever finds the whatever it is, when they give them the when you get the needle sword, you know what I mean? What do you call it?
Say that again. Say that again.
I said, when you go and you get everybody gets what do you call that?
The vaccination?
Vaccination. There you go.
Okay.
Thank you, sister. I appreciate that. But anyway, you get a vaccination. All of this has got to do with finances, and even the hospitals. People think that is something that's nice to do, and people are. No, but that is big industry, these pharmaceutical companies and all of this stuff here. And, you can't blame them, but what we have to do is be able to protect ourselves against all of this stuff, because the motive behind it is, why are there so many hospitals in our area? Why is there so many advertisements on television about hospitals and what they can do for you and how many beds can they fill? Because there's a quota that most of these hospitals like to reach, and like if they have beds, it's like a hotel. The quickest analogy I can give you is that the number one thing they want to know is how many beds did we fill, this month, and what did we fill them on? Did we fill them on? What areas did they get? Did they get operations? Did they get what was it? Radiation? I mean, how did we make money?
Yeah.
It's questions.
And,
so you must remember that.
Right. So what I hear you saying is that part of what we have to face is that there's actually a quote from Bell Hooks, if I'm remembering it correctly, that, in this culture, in white supremacist capitalist culture, it was not designed for us to be well. And so for all of the ways that we can, to talk to, elders like yourself who has seen sort of this arc of history, right? And the way things change and the way they also stay the same. So in this sort of last brief comment, I wonder for those who are feeling a lot of sadness and despair in this moment, what would you say to that person? What would you say to me? I have those moments to feel encouraged.
Well, I tell you, I see the sadness of a lot of it because my brother-in-law just passed 2 weeks ago, and he didn't die from this virus, but he passed on a time when everything was so confusing because you can't the distance program that they have, a social distance where you can only have 4 or 5 people together at one time and whatever. I mean, these are unbelievable things, and they're not just happening here; they're happening all over the world. That's the coordination that I'm looking at. Is how the whole world is involved in this, and I think that we as a community. What you're doing is very important. I mean, we got every tool that we can think of. The only thing that we're not using is our common sense, number one, that we must work together. And it has nothing to do with whether it's white people or Asian people or African American people. I mean, as communities, you look at that and you can resolve certain things. But the key of this whole thing is that we're all human. It's the human condition that we're dealing with, you see. And if we could deal with each other as humans, as a human being, and then you could resolve these issues. Because if a person is sick and they're just about to pass away from this dimension that we're in, they want to know whether or not they can use your heart. Can they use your kidneys? Can they use your eyeballs? I mean, they'll take your whole body and use different parts of your body to give to people who are living. So it has nothing to do with whether or not you're a Caucasian or an African American or whatever. It depends on, are you ready for the challenge? It depends on, are you prepared to be the best? And not only to be the best, but to stay the best. Because it's one thing to reach a goal, but then the other thing that I always look at is, but how do you maintain it?
Right.
How do you maintain it? And so I think that we're well on our way to doing that, because you look at the modern technology that exists today, and I think communications is the number one thing. And if we all could get on same wavelength, just like when in the music business, when the first thing we do when we go in the studio to record a record is we tune up. Everybody tunes up. The piano becomes the master instrument. And you say, okay, hit an E, hit an F, hit a G, and everybody starts and everybody gets in tune. Our community, when you look at it, our community is not in tune with each other. You see, and so when you're not in tune with each other, you get music but when music is in harmony, everybody says, oh wow, that was such a beautiful piece of music. But that's because people are they're in harmony. And sometimes it takes time to tune up an instrument, such as like a harp, or That's a hard instrument to tune up, you know. And so life is a hard thing to tune up together. And so we're on the way because we've been through a lot.
Yes.
We've been through so much over the last 400 or 500 years.
Yes.
And so we must, there's so many things like we say, are you afraid of? There's nothing for us to be afraid of. Because I'll say this to myself. I say, you know, hey, this is Allah's world. You know, this is Allah's world. He created everything. And so as long as you stick on that level, and sometimes we're at our best, and sometimes we're not at our best. So just keep asking Allah for forgiveness. Try to be as well as we can be, you know. And I think that we're gonna be fine. That we got some wonderful little kids coming up. That if we push them as a community,
yes,
and create examples for them, you know, and to be able to work together, because it's hard for us to work together.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Brother Lukman. Your insight is always so valuable. And I always look forward to like your musical references and analogies.
Yeah.
So
you know, that's my whole thing is music.
I know, and I appreciate you so much. So I hope that you can continue to listen in, and we will be looking to you for that much needed guidance as well, inshallah.
But by the way,
yes.
Camilla,
yes,
it's I think that the thing that we need to think of as a community, because it's really, we're seeing it now. Like it's going to be food, clothing, and shelter. That's the thing that we need to concentrate on. And education is involved in all of this.
Yes.
But food, clothing, and shelter is going to be the number one thing, because you think things are a little mixed up now. But you let food run out, you let water run out, and you're going to have pandemonium, you see? And so we have no emergency plans as a group, as a people.
Yeah.
You understand? You have people competing with each other on things they don't even know nothing about. You see? So it's not the material world. It's supernatural. That's where we have to go. So. All right, hey, listen, I had a hard time trying to get on this phone tonight.
Well, I thank you so much.
Numbers you gave me.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much for persisting and for being with us. And we'll be reaching out to you shortly, inshallah.
All right, no problem. Thank you.
You're welcome. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, and so I think for us, it was definitely important for you all to hear the voices of an elder who, you know, I believe he's about 76 years young, that can, you know, again, provide that grounding and that reassurance of, you know, things that have been seen, but also ways that we can still learn from this moment. So Asha, I want to kind of bring you back. I know we're at 9:40, so we're a little bit behind, but we started. So thank you all for still staying with us, and this recording will be available. But we want to, you know, tell you a bit more about the project, how you can get involved, and what our next steps are.
Thank you.
Hold on, let me.
Okay, we can go to the next slide.
Bring you back. Yes. Okay.
That was amazing, Brother Luqman, mashallah. I feel like got my mind going in so many different directions. So I know that Brother Mahmoud spoke a bit about Somali culture. I'm also Somali, and I'll be using a lot of that cultural knowing as a framework for how I talk about this project, inshallah. So this is a proverb, and it is Korwael wa wada indo. So this literally means on the top of the skin is a bunch of eyes, but it actually means they see everything and they know everything. And I think it's really important when I actually learned this proverb this week when I started talking to my parents about this. You know, I feel like I've been asking so many questions throughout my whole life, but, you know, you always uncover something new. I think it's really important what you had mentioned earlier, Zahir, about, you know, us extending, you know, our existence and our knowledge base by having these conversations. And another way of looking at this is also looking at it as an affirmation of elders' intuition, their perceptiveness, and their ways of being and knowing. Go to the next slide. And then, you know, we've talked a bit about this through the other panelists, so I won't spend too much time. But a part of this project, inshallah, is to be able to reconnect. And so what that looks like is bridging the gaps that have been created through forced migration, conflict, displacement, through a very long period of time historically, whether you want to start at the vantage point in 1400s with Columbus, or even before that in forced migrations in the continent. And another way of looking at this is also language. You know, if you look at second generation immigrants, there's that disconnect between older generation and younger generation in terms of being able to even understand each other. And that isn't just about language proficiency, but more so proverbs, music, sort of deeper ways of understanding. So even when you have these conversations with your elders, do you even really understand the proverb? Like, do you understand what it took to sort of create this piece? And then also to think about the broken linkages and our cultural differences. And this doesn't have to be just sort of outside of the US context, right? Doesn't have to only apply to more recent immigrants, but even if you look at, you know, communities that have been here for a very long time, each generation there's a cultural shift. I know many of us have different ways of looking at life, and that makes it really difficult to understand our elders when we are trying to document these stories and understand these stories and understand their ways of being. We'll go to the next slide. And so, you know, I think that when I was engaged in this project and similar projects that I've worked on before in art and cultural ethnoautobiography, I tried to think of systems or ways of being that already feel natural to me. And so those tend to be from the continent. And one that a lot of us know a lot about is Ubuntu, which is I am because you are. It's a universal bond connecting humanity at all levels. Desmond Tutu explained it as the essence of being human. Ubuntu speaks particularly about the fact that you can't exist as a human being in isolation. And I think it's really important to think about that in this moment in COVID, when our elders are oftentimes in isolation. Many of us are in physical isolation, and that physical isolation creates other forms of isolation. And so that reduces and flattens our humanity and our ability to see one another, our ability to understand one another. And these fissures existed before COVID. So one could just know that, you know, that is deepening every moment. Even my dad, I feel so bad for him. He looks out the window to see like the mosque, you know, if there are cars coming in and out. And I'm like, you know, Dad, the world is shut down for this moment. Like, and so I know that physical isolation and the community that he's fostered is really difficult to overcome. I can go to the next slide. And Sankofa is another very popular concept in terms of how we engage our reality, our history, also our future. It's an African word from the Akan tribe in Ghana, and the literal translation is, it is not taboo to fetch what is a risk of being left behind. And so, you know, this is in the same vein that we've spoken about, which is collapsing the past, present, and future, and being able to, you know, enrich our lives from our histories, as well as applying that knowledge today and, you know, fostering a new culture and a new way of being for generations to come, inshallah. Let me go to the next slide. I don't know. I feel like seeing Abwan Hadrawi smile just like makes me really happy. So for those of you who are Somali or not, you may be familiar with his work. He is the most popular Somali poet. His work is often compared to Shakespeare, which I don't really care for that comparison, but for people to kind of understand the gravity of his work and the volumes that he's really put out throughout his life. And so I think it's important to have his picture up here. And I know Mahmoud spoke a bit about Somali oral tradition earlier. So I just wanted to kind of expand on, just a snapshot of a culture that I come from and one that I tried to understand on a deeper level. So again, Somalis have passed down our oral history via rich culture of storytelling. I'm going to add story listening and cite user here because I didn't think about it like that before. Through various mediums, including but not limited to folk tales, poetry, prose, proverbs, and songs. This is a way that Somalis have been able to transmit culture, news, traditions, and ways of being across generations. And two key components in that transmission of knowledge has been memory and practice. And so without that memory and practice of telling those stories and listening to those stories, that's been disrupted. So that process of memorizing these stories or these poems and the disruption of that practice really reduces the authenticity. And it doesn't give us clear stories sometimes. And so, there's a number of factors that contribute to this, whether it's, conflict, civil wars, forced migration. Again, it doesn't have to be just in the continent. Forced migration from, southern parts of America towards the north, right? There's so much disruption, and the ability to pass that information on is disrupted, and there is that displacement. And so I've seen that even having conversations with elders in my community is, sometimes there's a reluctance not wanting to talk about certain stories because of the trauma, because of the conflict. And that's so foreign for Somalis because our culture is literally about, an oral tradition, passing that information on. So coming across elders who become silent when you bring up certain stories is really unsettling because this is how we pass our traditions on. And so, I think a part of this project is, inshallah, to draw on these legacies and to be able to heal from some of these disconnections, inshallah. I'm going to the next slide. So this picture that, I don't know if that comes after or before, but shout out to Dr. Camilla for finding it, that really beautiful colored picture. And it is actually a painting of Somalis doing Barambur and Jander, which is our different folk dances that have a lot of poetry and ancestral and elder praise. So thank you for finding that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what these two mean in terms of the cultural context. Again, Barambur and Jander are two examples of dances that are practiced in Somalia, and I see them as complete examples of embodiment. They include movement, affirmations, dance, drumming. They also focus on honoring elders and the ancestors. They're also a part of collapsing the past, present, and future because you're honoring your past, you're engaging your present, and you're making praise and worship for your future. And so I think that's really important to be in that space. And that space has really taught me a lot about myself, and in our culture and our history and our legacy. If you really listen, you really listen to the songs and what they're saying, it's truly powerful experience. But again, when you're displaced in a new society and you're having to work sometimes jobs that require you to be working the entire day or having two jobs, when can you really come together with the elders and the youth and have these spaces of celebration and transmission of knowledge and culture and tradition? It's very rare. And so there is definitely a decrease in the accessibility of these spaces. And with COVID, please do not come together and recreate any of these spaces, but just to think about it. And so, yeah, we can go to the next slide. And I wanted to close off with this passage, this quote from the great late Dr. Martin Luther King. He said, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And that has never been more truer than it is now during COVID-19. Our lives are literally dependent upon our mutual trust and the ways in which we decide to move forward. So inshallah, what that will look like is really honoring our elders, learning from our elders, and tapping into indigenous forms of interconnectedness, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Asha, for providing that background. And what I think is really truly special about this work is that we're drawing from so many different traditions and inspirations that I think it provides a richness and a depth that we could not have achieved if we had come together or done this work in a siloed way, right? So we can pull from literally every corner of the world to figure out what is, again, our best practices that ground us and connect us to elders and that past, the present, and the future. And it's particularly now when it's so difficult to even think about what next week may bring. I think that ability to hear from, someone like Brother Lukman and say, like, we don't have anything to be afraid of. Like, he said to me the other day, he was like, I think this is actually a time to rejoice. And I was like, what are you talking about? How could you say that? And he said, we've been through worse, right? But we are lucky because we have survived, and we have survived with our, integrity and ingenuity and resilience. And so we can apply all of those things now, right? We are the fortunate ones to have experienced and survived and thrived through those things. And we can bring that to bear now. And so again, I was like, see, this is why we need you to offer that perspective, because I was like, there's nothing to be rejoicing about right now. But alhamdulillah, all of that, again, as Allah's mercy is still present, so is the joy. So what this kind of tying all of these things together, what does it mean for Black Muslims? Instilling pride and resilience to counter that internalized self-hatred and oppression, to deepen our connections, which can absolutely help us think about how we heal collectively from this moment. I want to bring back Zahir, if he is still on with us, to just offer sort of, after kind of tying all of these threads together in this project and in this way, sort of your reflections on what you heard from Brother Lukman, from Asha, from Mahmoud, in sort of your position as an historian. What have you heard today that really kind of stood out to you?
I think I was surprised at how, because this is my first time speaking with both Mahmoud and Asha, and really pleasantly surprised to see how much convergence there was in our thinking about the necessity of this work and the kind of theoretical ideas behind it in terms of the grounding and the need for continuity. The reason why I always want to make sure listening is part of the equation is that oftentimes, we think that the storyteller is the most active person in this process because they are expelling sound or moving their body or presenting visuals. And I think what's really important for us is to understand that what someone tells you is very much dependent on what you make yourself willing to listen to. And so it's really important as we embark on this work to understand how present we need to be in this process. And that, there are different ways of listening. There's, of course, listening to sound, there's listening to visuals, there's listening to objects, there's listening to movement. Listening does bridge distance, but we may also have to do some of these interviews over distance, right? Because of the nature of this pandemic, we have to maintain distance from vulnerable communities who may be immunocompromised, that we need to get stories from, or we want an opportunity for them to tell their stories. So I think we really have to think, I mean, so that's where my mind was running to was, I think when you got Brother Lukman on the phone and this idea of like bridging different kinds of technologies, I think we have to be really open to the different ways we have to relate. You know, like how Asha was like, now don't y'all go bust out in a collective dance, because we can't do that yet. You know, and I think so as we have to think of how we plan to listen. And we have to make sure that we create opportunities to listen so that we don't put anyone at risk, right? And that's a new reality, right? So how do we listen across distance? How do we listen over the phone? How do we listen over visuals, right? And there are things that we can do visually when we're listening that we have to think of how to do audibly, right? And so, you know, one of the things I like to do, even when we're all like on Zoom, is like, you'll see, like, I try to do physical affirmation, right? Like you can listen without making a sound. And so that's just some of the things that my mind just kind of rushed to, is just, and for me, listening is, so one of my favorite verses in the Quran is, and I don't have the exact, you know, I'm gonna let the brother who's the scholar know the exact phrasing, but it basically says, make room in your assemblies. You know, that there is enough room, Allah will make it so. And the reason why I like that verse is because we, especially this generation, we are a broadcast generation. We always are, you know, presenting either physically, visually, audibly, and, you know, make room in your assemblies means also making space, making audible space. So creating spaces where people can speak into. And it also, a lot of people think that that listening is like a bridge for empathy. And I understand that, but I also like make room in your assemblies because it means being able to sit with stories that are not yours. And that you don't have to identify with the storyteller. You have to respect the space that they create by their storytelling. And it's, you know, listening is not a narcissistic exercise. I mean, most people approach it that way, where they're listening for themselves, like, where am I in the story? Or where do I show up? Or where do we show up? And I think we have to be willing to listen to stories that don't have us in it, right?
I immediately thought of this. When I show my 4-year-old pictures of me, you know what he says? Where's Izzy?
Yeah, it's very natural. It's like a very natural thing. Like if you take a group photo and everyone shows the photo, the first thing we look for is ourselves in the picture. Like, where am I? Making sure I look good. And we have to make sure listening is not that, right? Like listening is about creating space for people. And that really is part of the honoring. So, you know, that to me is really important. I also think that, you know, there are enormous resources in the histories of our communities that we have not yet excavated. We have, and Camilla, you and I know each other for a lot longer than I do here co-panelists. And you know that we've been talking about this kind of necessity for a very long time. That, you know, we're losing, these books are I don't want to say burning, but they're vanishing from us, right? These resources. There have been significant kinds of survivals. I mean, one of the reasons why Brother Lukman is so kind of optimistic is because he has that perspective, right? It gives you that long-term vision. And so much of the pandemic now has us focus on the immediacy of the day, some of which is necessary for survival, but it's important for us to to imagine and think long term. I'm going to butcher another hadith I saw someone mentioned, I think, that even if it's the last day, you should still plant a tree, right? Or still plant a seed, because that's the nature of hope. Is not a belief, it is a practice. Hope is not something you have, it's something you do. So this work that we're doing, we're not just doing it for us, we're doing it for generations from now. And so that's my final point, is when we do this work, make sure that we do this work with the intention of being very committed to the preservation of it, right? There have been so many oral history projects, just as a practitioner, where I know there's so many projects where people do these projects and no one gets to hear the oral histories. They're not accessible, they're not available. And part of being good listeners, part of making room in our assemblies, is creating spaces and opportunities, not just for people to be heard, but for them to be listened to.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Zahir. I feel like there's so many possibilities. Like, it makes me really excited. You know, one of the things that I shared today was that, you know, I had this kind of overwhelming sense this morning, like the world will never be the same. And I'm thrilled and I'm terrified at the same time. And I think it is these practices, right, of the practice of hope, and doing the work of listening and of storytelling, that helps, you know, me lean more towards the thrilled side of, you know, thinking about our future. So thank you so much. And I also want to bring forward Ustad Mahmoud to add to that in terms of what sort of came to mind with all of these elements being woven together. And you know, not knowing the co-panelists, but again, like Zahir said, seeing the convergence in thinking. What sort of reflections do you have to offer as we near the end of the webinar?
Yeah, actually, Auntie, so me and you have known each other for some time. I'm friends with Asha as well. It's Zahir, I didn't know, but I've been a big fan of for a very long time. And his work has been, for me as a Muslim, in the history of memory, public history, has been pretty fundamental. It kind of shaped my own view. But I think that for me, what was most, I think, impactful is just the different kind of ley lines and intersections in the work that we do, and how, you know, the idea that no man is an island, right? No woman is an island. All of us are desperately in need of human connection to survive. And I think in the life of our beloved Prophet ﷺ, we see the need for community, right? When he came to Medina, the first thing he did wasn't you know, raise a standing army. It wasn't levy taxes. It wasn't, you know, collect grain. The first thing he did was create bonds of brotherhood and sisterhood between previously unacquainted people. And when he came to Mecca, he didn't you know, ride in on a horse and behead people or you know, like a conquerors did in his time. He pardoned people and he allowed them to stay in their homes, and he gave them their wealth, even those who had wronged him. And so I think that in his life we see a wonderful example for what it means to be on top and how we should act when it seems the cards are against us. And you know, I really did appreciate what Brother Kenny said about this is not, I think, the end for Muslims. And there is, unfortunately, in some of our Muslim communities across the globe, a very millenarian bent that this is the end times. And there's this strange fascination with the world ending and Chicken Little and the sky is falling. And all of us want to, I don't know, hasten the coming of the apocalypse. And it's such a strange thing to me, because who wants to live through the apocalypse, right? If anything, we should hasten to live in times where there's relative peace and unity. And the end of times, you know, they will come. And for all of us, when we take our last breath, that's the end of our life anyway, right? Until Allah calls us back. So that's a sombering thing to think about, and a thing that requires a lot of, you know, forethought. And to that point, our elders, I think, are deeply intimate and aware of the limits of their own lives, like of their own lives, right? They're very aware of their own mortality. And I just remember this week, the last 2 weeks, so many prominent Somali Americans and Somalis globally have passed away. So this week we lost the great songwriter, the great poet, playwright Hudaidi, who passed away in the UK, who bridges really two very different periods in the history of our culture, the post-colonial period and the pre-colonial period, right? He was born at the turn of the century, lived through some of the most, you know, painful and crushing moments in our culture, but also was there at the advent of the Somali state, right? And raised the flag and wrote the first anthems of our culture. So his loss is really like a human library burning down. We lost the late great Adan Ali, who was the founder of the Somali Youth League. We lost that great Hawa Ismail, who was one of the first Somali pilots, right? A woman who's a pioneer in philanthropy and history. So the libraries that we hold dear are burning around us, it seems, but also we're building libraries back up when we come together in this way. And so there are fires everywhere, but we're actively putting them out. And if anything, we're actually equipping people with equipment to be preventive about them, right?
Yes.
To wet the bark, so to speak, to ensure that the fires don't start. And so I hope, inshallah, that for me, it's a real pleasure being the youngest person on this panel, but also being in community with all you folks. So I'm super happy that I was here, and I'm really, really appreciative of Brother Zahir, Sister Camila, Sister Asha, Brother Kenny, everybody who stayed on to listen to a bunch of nerds talk for about 2 hours. But alhamdulillah, and I hope that this project, people can support it, and it doesn't require that everybody, we're not asking for $1 million here. We're not asking for monthly donations. We're just asking that you help us the best way you know how. If that's elevating a retweet, if that's talking about tonight's session to your friends and family, sharing the link when it's out. Perfect. I just gave you your next step. And Asha's wonderful father, mashallah.
Yes. Thank you so much, Mahmoud, and also just echoing the appreciation of folks who are really interested in this project. And it is Asha Noor's father, Dr. Muhammad Noor, who was the catalyzing sort of inspiration for this. And, Asha sharing her story of, telling her dad, like, no, you cannot go to, you can't go to the masjid, and this is what we're trying to protect against, and being curious about his story and his perspectives, his insights. So he's quite literally now the face of this project, alhamdulillah. And so our next steps include, will be offering guidance for those. So this is again not something that requires a heavy lift. We want people to be curious, right? Be curious about the treasure in your midst, right? Sometimes we talk about this buried treasure, and some of this is like that, that we have to be convinced that everyone has value, that everyone can contribute in this moment. There's no such thing as someone who is a burden, that if there are those who are at risk, more so because of their age or physical health conditions, everyone has value to add. And that might be in the form of sharing about your life, sharing about the experiences that you've had. And we know that this is a very difficult thing for many of us to do, not just our elders, but in this moment, we are so committed to doing this sort of excavation and preservation, because we don't know. Only Allah knows how much time we have, and we don't want to waste any of it by not being curious, by being so preoccupied with simply our present that we do not think about the past and the future. And so if you want to get involved, you can join the National Black Muslim COVID Coalition. There's more information on the website. Stay home. We cannot stress this enough. And again, drawing from our spiritual tradition, and if you hear of an outbreak of plague in a land, do not enter it. And if the plague breaks out in a place where you are in it, do not leave that place. I spoke to, mashallah, this wonderful Imam, Imam Malik, Hanafi Malik in Flint, Michigan. And when I spoke to him, he said, Assalamu alaikum, sis. There's something about the voices of our elders too that just bring you kind of instant comfort. And often when you don't know you need it. And he said, sister, how you doing in this plague? And it just made me smile. And, for a moment, just was so soothing and comforting. And so that made me also think about, you know, his story as an imam who's very active in the Flint community. And I believe originally from, or part of family from Oklahoma. And so all of the migrations that even he has experienced, and sort of the kinds of plagues, so to speak, that he has also lived through, is a part of what we're trying to preserve. So what can you do? Like, share, follow. We are committed to disseminating this information, and that will include how we want folks to become involved in the Wisdom of the Elders project. And that could simply be identifying, you know, it could be a parent or a grandparent in your community that, you know, it might be struggling with this isolation. We're all are struggling, right? Just that is a fact. This is something that's really unprecedented. And everyone has a story. Everyone has something to share. And it is really up to us, and I like the way that Zahir framed this, is how do we listen across distance? How do we express concern and care and affection across this distance? You know, has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given us this opportunity to really be creative in doing that necessary preservation in new ways, right? Like there will be books written about this time, and we want to write them for us, and really capture the rich experiences of those who are living through it, and those who have lived through other experiences, to offer that breadth of perspective. So please, thank you all for listening. We do have the questions that came in, but we are running really late, and I want to be respectful of folks' time. Zoom fatigue is the thing. It's real. So this recording, the slides, the written summary will be available on the website. So go to blackmuslimcoalition.com. We will send out an email with the link to all of these resources, including how you can participate either as a storyteller, as a listener, but we really want to get as many folks involved in the preservation of our history as possible. So I want to ask my brother Mahmoud to close us with a dua, you know, particular for this moment and this time, if you could.
Inshallah. I'll do the Arabic first, then give the English, inshallah, as something you reminded me of earlier this week. Bismillah. اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك، اللهم يا مسبب الأسباب يا مفتح الأبواب فتح قلوبنا عن طاعتك، اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. O Allah, turner of hearts, we ask you to turn our hearts toward Islam. O Allah, opener of doors, we ask you to open our doors towards your belief. Rectify our affairs in the dunya and the akhirah. Allow us to be with the ones that we love. The Prophet ﷺ says, Al-maru ma'a man ahab. The person is with those whom he loves, and Allah knows that I love all of you for the sake of Allah. And I hope that that love is mutual. Maybe we be reunited with those that we've lost, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant them the highest Jannah. This is a time of loss, and I know that there's across the board, whether directly or indirectly, we are affected by the passing of our loved ones, old or young. And so we ask to be reunited with them in the best of places, inshallah.
Ameen, ameen, ameen. So thank you all for joining. This information will be available. We would love for you to get involved. And if you have a question or a comment that hasn't been answered, we will do our best to respond in the most efficient and effective way possible. So thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.